The relentless summer sun beat down upon the vibrant beach, painting the azure waters with shimmering gold. Amidst the laughter and the ceaseless rhythm of the waves, a new figure had recently emerged. A quiet man named Lee. He was an unassuming presence, often seen on the fringes of the bustling sands, his lean frame moving with an almost ethereal grace as he engaged in what appeared to be a rigorous personal form of training. He spoke little, his gaze often fixed on the distant horizon, a serene detachment that made him almost invisible to the boisterous regulars. His humble demeanor, coupled with his solitary focus, meant he was largely overlooked, a silent shadow performing intricate, fluid movements that few bothered to truly observe or understand. This beach community, like many others, had its own hierarchy, its unspoken rules, and its undisputed king. That king was Rex, a man whose physique was as imposing as his ego. Surrounded by a loyal, equally boisterous clique, Rex ruled the sands with an iron fist of intimidation and arrogance. His days were spent basking in the admiration of his friends and the wary deference of other beachgoers, his booming laugh echoing across the shore as he recounted exaggerated tales of his prowess. He was a force to be reckoned with, or so he believed, and anyone who dared to challenge his perceived dominance quickly learned the error of their ways. It wasn't long before Rex and his friends noticed Lee. Initially, he was just a curiosity, an oddity performing strange dance-like movements. They watched him from a distance, their eyes narrowing with a mixture of suspicion and condescension. Rex, with a dismissive wave of his hand, had branded Lee as weak, perhaps even eccentric, certainly no threat to his reign. The subtle mockery began almost immediately. Whispered jokes among the group, snide remarks about Lee's focused intensity, his perceived lack of real strength. They'd mimic his movements with exaggerated, clumsy gestures, chuckling at their own wit, convinced that Lee was oblivious or simply too timid to react. Lee, however, heard them. He felt their eyes, sensed their derision. Yet, his reaction was consistently one of profound calm, an almost indifferent acknowledgement that further fueled their disdain. He would simply continue his training, his breathing steady, his movements unbroken, as if their taunts were nothing more than the distant chirping of birds. This unwavering composure, this quiet defiance, began to irritate Rex deeply. He thrived on immediate reactions, on fear, on subservience. Lee's placidness was an affront, a challenge to his authority that he couldn't quite grasp. The tension in the air, subtle at first, began to thicken, a palpable undercurrent beneath the surface of the beach's carefree atmosphere. As days turned into weeks, Rex's irritation festered, growing into a burning need to assert his dominance. Lee, in his quiet refusal to be intimidated, had become a symbol of everything Rex despised in an outsider. The subtle mockery escalated into overt taunts, shouted across the sand, designed to humiliate and provoke. One sweltering afternoon, with a significant crowd gathered, Rex decided it was time to make an example. Striding purposefully towards Lee, his entourage trailing behind him like a menacing shadow, Rex stopped a few feet away. His chest puffed out, a sneer twisting his lips. He issued a public challenge, his voice booming over the murmurs of the curious onlookers. He dared Lee to a contest, a physical showdown, intended not just to defeat him but to utterly crush his spirit in front of everyone. Lee paused his movements, his eyes, dark and unreadable, finally meeting Rex's. A flicker, almost imperceptible, passed through them, a spark of something ancient, something profound. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he quietly accepted the challenge. The beach, for a fleeting moment, fell silent. The air thrummed with anticipation on the day of the challenge. A larger crowd than usual had congregated, drawn by the irresistible allure of public spectacle, a morbid curiosity to witness the quiet outsider finally confront the beach's self-proclaimed king. Rex, basking in the spotlight he so desperately craved, strutted along the shoreline, his chest expanded, his voice a booming instrument of self-aggrandizement. He regaled his eager audience with embellished tales of his past fighting exploits, each story more audacious than the last, painting himself as an unstoppable force, a titan of the sands. His friends, ever loyal and equally boisterous, egged him on, their raucous laughter punctuating his boasts, creating a cacophony of assumed victory. Amidst this theatrical display, Li remained a stark contrast. He stood apart, a solitary figure, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon, his posture emanating a profound stillness. His silence was not born of fear, but of an unwavering focus, an internal calm that created an almost ethereal aura around him, further deepening the mystery that surrounded his unassuming presence. This quiet intensity, so unlike Rex's flamboyant showmanship, left many in the crowd feeling a strange sense of unease. They had come for entertainment, for a clear-cut victory, but Li's enigmatic demeanor hinted at something far more complex. Unperturbed by Li's silent gravitas, Rex and his cronies doubled down on their mockery. Their jokes grew sharper, more personal, aimed at Li's lean physique, his measured movements, his perceived lack of aggression. "Look at him, he's probably never thrown a real punch in his life," one of Rex's friends jeered, eliciting snickers from their immediate circle. Another mimicked Li's earlier training routine, exaggerating the fluidity into a comical, effeminate dance. The laughter, initially boisterous, began to sound hollow, even forced as the blatant disrespect hung heavy in the salty air. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, their initial amusement curdling into a quiet discomfort at the sheer cruelty of the taunts. For Li, martial arts were never about aggression, never about proving dominance through brute force. His philosophy, forged through years of rigorous discipline and quiet contemplation, revolved around self-defense, self-mastery, and the cultivation of inner peace. He saw the fighting form as a path to understanding oneself, a physical manifestation of mental fortitude. Violence, for him, was a last resort, a necessary evil only when all other avenues for peace and respect had been exhausted. He had endured their scorn, their whispers, their subtle digs, understanding them as mere distractions, the misguided projections of insecure minds. But the persistent, escalating taunts, the deliberate attempts to humiliate, began to chip away at his carefully constructed composure. A subtle tension entered his shoulders, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. His eyes, though still calm, held a new, deeper intensity, a flicker of irritation that had not been present before. He had accepted the challenge out of a quiet necessity, a recognition that sometimes actions speak louder than words, especially to those who refuse to listen. Then came Rex's final insult, a crude, vulgar remark hurled directly at Li, questioning his manhood and his very right to exist peacefully on his beach. It was a line crossed, a boundary irrevocably breached, triggering a profound shift within Li. The placid facade, so meticulously maintained, began to crack, revealing a glimpse of the coiled power beneath. His breath, though still controlled, deepened almost imperceptibly. His stance, already firm, settled even further, rooted to the earth. The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken energy. It was a silent signal, understood by no one yet, that the quiet storm was about to break, and the dynamics of the beach were on the precipice of an irreversible change. The spectacle they had craved was about to begin, but not in the way anyone, especially Rex, had ever anticipated. The tension, thick and palpable, finally snapped. With a sneer that promised pain and public humiliation, Rex launched his attack. It was a predictable, powerful assault, a wild, wide swing aimed at Li's head, fueled by adrenaline and unchecked aggression. Rex moved like a bull, all brute force and no finesse, expecting Li to flinch, to cower, to be swept away by the sheer momentum of his charge. The crowd held its breath, anticipating the swift, decisive end to the spectacle. But Li did not flinch, he did not cower. Instead, with an economy of motion that bordered on the miraculous, he simply wasn't there. His body became a blur, a whisper of movement, a mere suggestion of presence. Rex's fist, intended to connect with bone and flesh, met only empty air, whistling past where Li had been a split second before. The force of the missed blow caused Rex to stumble, his powerful frame momentarily off balance, his face contorting in a mixture of surprise and burgeoning frustration. A collective murmur rippled through the gathered onlookers. It was a sound of genuine astonishment, a subtle shift in the crowd's energy. Rex's confidence, so unshakable moments earlier, seemed to waver, a tiny crack appearing in his arrogant facade. He recovered quickly, though, his pride stung, and he lunged again, a flurry of less controlled, more desperate swings. But Lee moved like water, flowing around every attack, his body a living, breathing paradox of stillness and explosive motion. He didn't just evade. He danced, his movements fluid and precise, each sidestep, each duck, each slight adjustment of his weight showcasing a mastery that Rex, with all his brawn, clearly lacked. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed ballet against the clumsy flailing of a bear. Rex's frustration mounted with every failed attempt. His attacks became wilder, less effective, each punch carrying more anger than precision. He grunted, he cursed, his face reddening with exertion and impotent rage. The contrast between his raw, unrefined power and Lee's economical, controlled movements was stark, almost comical yet utterly captivating. Lee wasn't just avoiding Rex, he was subtly exposing the limitations of his opponent's brute force, revealing the gaping holes in his technique without laying a single hand on him. Then, in a moment that truly silenced the crowd, Lee demonstrated a specific technique. As Rex charged once more, a clumsy, full-body tackle, Lee didn't meet force with force. Instead, with a lightning-fast, almost imperceptible shift of his hips and a gentle redirection of Rex's momentum, he used Rex's own energy against him. Rex found himself suddenly propelled past Lee, spinning uncontrollably, his feet scrambling for purchase on the sand before he stumbled several feet away, completely bewildered and utterly off balance. He looked back at Lee, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. He was not fighting a man. He was fighting an enigma. The growing realization among the onlookers was palpable. The whispers turned into hushed gasps, then into a profound silence. They had profoundly misjudged Lee. The quiet, unassuming man they had mocked was, in fact, a force of nature, a master of his craft. The laughter and jeers that had filled the air minutes before had completely vanished, replaced by an awe-struck reverence. Rex, his face a mask of desperation, launched one final, desperate lunge. It was a pathetic, almost pathetic attempt to connect, to land even a glancing blow, to salvage some shred of his rapidly crumbling dominance. But Lee met it, not with a punch, but with a swift, decisive counter that was less an attack and more a demonstration of absolute control. With an effortless grace, he stepped inside Rex's guard, his hand moving with blinding speed, not to strike, but to deftly grasp Rex's wrist and elbow. A fractional twist, a precise leverage point, and Rex's arm was instantly neutralized, his body momentarily locked in an uncomfortable, vulnerable position. The fight, if it could even be called that, was over. The immediate aftermath of Lee's counter left Rex disarmed and utterly humbled, not a single punch having been landed by the quiet man. A collective gasp rippled through the stunned silence of the crowd, a sound that quickly morphed into whispers of disbelief. Rex's friends, who moments ago had been boisterous in their support, now stood frozen, their bravado evaporating into thin air, replaced by expressions of shock and an almost primal fear. Lee, meanwhile, remained a picture of serene composure, his breathing even, his gaze steady. There was no triumph in his eyes, no flicker of aggression, just a calm, almost detached demeanor that underscored the effortlessness of his victory. On Rex's face, the stark realization of his utter defeat was etched deeply. His chest heaved, not from exertion, but from the sudden, crushing weight of public humiliation. The arrogance that had defined him just minutes before had crumbled, leaving behind a hollow shell. He stood there momentarily paralyzed, his eyes darting from Lee to the now silent, captivated crowd, searching for an escape that simply wasn't there. His world, built on a foundation of perceived strength and intimidation, had imploded. Lee's voice, when it came, was soft, almost a murmur against the vastness of the beach, yet it resonated with an undeniable authority that commanded attention. True strength, he began, his words carefully chosen, is not about overpowering others, but about mastering oneself. Respect, he added, his gaze briefly meeting Rex's, is earned through discipline, not demanded through fear. It was a statement delivered without malice, without triumph, a simple truth offered in the wake of a profound lesson. Yet its impact was immense, shattering the last vestiges of Rex's defiance. The atmosphere on the beach underwent a complete, irreversible shift. The undercurrent of mockery and anticipation had dissolved, replaced by an expansive awe. The air, once thick with tension and scorn, now hummed with a newfound reverence for the unassuming figure who had so effortlessly dismantled a bully's reign. Rex, his spirit visibly broken, managed a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of pride, a mumbled retort that died on his lips, unheard and unheeded. His eyes, once burning with aggression, now held only a vacant stare, reflecting the shattered fragments of his ego. Then, slowly at first, a hesitant ripple began in the crowd. A single clap, tentative and unsure, broke the silence. It was followed by another, then several more, growing louder, more confident, as individuals processed the profound lesson they had just witnessed. The applause swelled, a wave of genuine appreciation and respect washing over the beach. It wasn't just for Lee's physical prowess, but for the quiet dignity with which he had wielded it, for the powerful message he had conveyed without ever raising his voice in anger. The collective understanding was clear. They had come for a spectacle, but they had received a revelation. The beach, once a stage for Rex's dominance, had become a temple for Lee's quiet wisdom. Rex, defeated and exposed, stood alone in the center of a crowd that had once cheered his every swagger, now applauding the man he had so foolishly underestimated. The echo of the applause was a stark reminder of his fall, a symphony of his undoing, and the undeniable rise of a true master. Rex and his friends, their faces a mixture of disbelief and simmering resentment, retreated from the scene, their usual boisterous confidence replaced by a humiliated silence. The carefully constructed facade of their dominance had been shattered, crumbling under the weight of Lee's effortless display. They moved as a single, defeated unit, disappearing into the fringes of the beach, their bravado permanently deflated. The crowd, having witnessed an extraordinary event, began to disperse, but the memory of Lee's quiet, powerful demonstration lingered in the air, a palpable energy that reshaped the very atmosphere of the place. Lee, seemingly unfazed by the spectacle he had just created, calmly resumed his solitary training, as if the dramatic confrontation had been nothing more than a momentary interruption to his routine. His movements remained fluid, his focus unwavering, every stretch and pose executed with the same meticulous precision. He was an island of serene discipline amidst the lingering echoes of chaos. Soon, a few curious beachgoers, no longer driven by mockery but by a genuine, respectful curiosity, cautiously approached him. They did not interrupt his practice, but observed from a distance, their gazes filled with a newfound appreciation, silently acknowledging the profound depth of his skill. Meanwhile, in a quiet, secluded corner of the beach, Rex grappled with the stinging reality of his defeat. The humiliation was a bitter taste in his mouth, the echoing applause for Lee a tormenting symphony. The seeds of self-doubt, foreign and unwelcome, had been firmly planted in his arrogant mind. He replayed the rapid, almost invisible movements, the effortless evasion, the swift, decisive counter, each memory chipping away at his self-proclaimed strength. The image of Lee's calm, unwavering gaze haunted him, a stark contrast to his own seething frustration. He had always believed himself to be the strongest, the most formidable, but that illusion had been brutally shattered. Lee, in his moments of quiet reflection between exercises, processed the incident not with a sense of triumph but with a weary understanding of its necessity. He harbored no ill will towards Rex. His actions had simply been a demonstration of a fundamental principle, the necessity of self-defense, not just for the body, but for the spirit. He understood that sometimes a clear, unequivocal display of capability was the only way to deter aggression and establish a foundation for respect. It was a lesson he had learned many times over, in different forms, across various landscapes of human interaction. The story of the unassuming man who had humbled the beach's bully spread like wildfire through the community. It was whispered in hushed tones at the snack bar, recounted with animated gestures by the lifeguard, and discussed with awe among the regulars. Lee's legend was cemented not as a fighter, but as a master of himself, a quiet force of nature. A subtle but profound change became evident in how people interacted with him. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by deference, by a subtle nod of acknowledgement, by an almost reverent curiosity. Children, who once giggled at his unusual exercises, now watched with wide-eyed fascination. The lingering question, however, remained unspoken but ever present in the minds of those who had witnessed the event. What truly motivated Li, beyond just defending himself? Was it simply a matter of principle, or was there a deeper philosophical current flowing beneath his calm exterior, a purpose that transcended the simple act of self-preservation? The beach, once a stage for petty dramas, now held a deeper, more profound mystery, embodied in the quiet, disciplined figure who continued his daily rituals, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift he had caused in the lives and perceptions of everyone around him. The answer to that lingering question began to unfold days later, not through a dramatic revelation but in a quiet conversation. An older man, weathered by years of sun and sea, with eyes that held the wisdom of countless sunsets, approached Li as he concluded his morning exercises. Elias, a revered elder in the beach community, had witnessed the entire spectacle, his silence a testament to his deep understanding of human nature. He settled onto the sand a respectful distance away, his gaze gentle but penetrating. "You carry a heavy peace about you, young man," Elias observed, his voice a low rumble. "A peace that often comes from a storm weathered, not avoided." Li paused, his movement slowing, then stopping. He turned to Elias, a faint, almost imperceptible smile gracing his lips. "Life is a series of storms, isn't it, Elias? The art is not in preventing them, but in learning to dance in the rain." Elias nodded slowly, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Indeed, but some dances are more profound than others. What I saw the other day, it was more than just skill. It was a philosophy made manifest." He gestured vaguely towards the spot where Rex had been humbled. "That young man, Rex, he seeks power in domination. You, on the other hand, seem to embody power in restraint." Li's gaze drifted to the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "True power, Elias, is not about how many you can defeat, but how many you can uplift, and how well you can control yourself. There was a time, long ago, when I sought only to be the strongest, to prove myself. I was quick to anger, quick to react, but a great teacher once showed me that aggression is a weakness, a sign of fear. He taught me that true strength lies in knowing when to fight, and more importantly, when not to. He taught me that every punch thrown in anger diminishes the soul." He then shared a personal anecdote, a story from his youth, of a time he had used his nascent skills not for defense, but in a moment of youthful arrogance, to humble a rival who had slighted him. The victory had felt hollow, leaving a bitter residue of shame and regret. The rival, though physically unharmed, had been deeply wounded in spirit, and the memory of that unnecessary pain had haunted Li for years, shaping his philosophy. It was a powerful lesson in the true cost of unchecked ego and the profound responsibility that comes with skill. Elias listened intently, his expression unwavering. When Li finished, the older man simply reached out and placed a hand lightly on Li's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect and understanding. "You carry that wisdom well, my friend. The beach is richer for your presence." From a short distance away, partially obscured by a cluster of palm trees, Rex watched. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the quiet intensity of their conversation, the elder's gesture of respect. A flicker of something new ignited within him, not anger, but a nascent curiosity, a dawning realization that there was a depth to Li he had entirely overlooked. He had always equated power with shouting and dominance. Now he saw a silent, profound strength that radiated from Li, a strength that drew respect without demanding it. Later that afternoon, a child's kite string snapped, sending the colorful contraption soaring towards the crashing waves. Without a word, Li moved with an almost ethereal grace, plucking the kite from the air just before it plunged into the surf, returning it to the overjoyed child with a gentle smile. It was a small act, easily overlooked, but Rex saw it. He saw the kindness, the effortless efficiency, the genuine care. It was another piece of the puzzle, revealing a man whose power extended far beyond physical prowess. The transformation within Rex was slow, grudging, but undeniable. The initial resentment began to recede, replaced by a reluctant, almost unwilling admiration. He still couldn't bring himself to approach Li, the lingering sting of his humiliation too raw, but the seeds of reconciliation were sown. He found himself observing Li more closely, not with contempt, but with a burgeoning desire to understand. He was beginning to grasp that Li's power wasn't merely physical agility or brute force. It was a carefully cultivated spiritual and intellectual discipline, a profound understanding of self and the world. The weight of his past arrogance pressed heavily on Rex, a burden he could no longer carry. The image of Li, calm and effortless, retrieving the child's kite, replayed in his mind, a stark contrast to his own blustering, performative displays of strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Rex found himself walking along the shoreline, his gaze fixed on Li, who was practicing his forms in the fading light. There was a quiet dignity in Li's movements, a fluid dance of muscle and spirit that transcended mere exercise. Taking a deep breath, Rex approached him, his heart thumping in his chest like a drum. The words felt alien on his tongue, unfamiliar and raw. "Li," he began, his voice a little hoarse, I was wrong. About everything." He paused, searching for the right words, the honesty of the moment stripping away years of hardened pride. "I let my ego blind me. I judged you based on my own insecurities, and I acted like a fool." He looked down at the sand, unable to meet Li's steady gaze, a wave of shame washing over him. I want to understand. I want to learn." Li stopped his movements, his posture still, his breath even. He turned to face Rex, his expression unreadable, yet devoid of anger or judgment. There was only a profound stillness, an invitation for honesty. "Understanding begins with humility, Rex," Li said, his voice soft yet resonant, like the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. "And learning requires an open mind, free from the desire to dominate or control. True strength is not about crushing others, but about cultivating oneself. It is about discipline, respect, and the relentless pursuit of self-improvement, not for accolades, but for personal growth." He gestured to the vast ocean before them. The ocean does not boast of its power, yet it shapes the land with unwavering force. It embraces all, from the smallest pebble to the largest ship. It is both gentle and formidable. That is the kind of strength worth aspiring to. Li's words were not a lecture but an offering, a compassionate hand extended rather than a finger pointed in accusation. He spoke of the balance between force and yielding, the importance of inner peace, and the responsibility that comes with any skill. He shared insights not just into martial arts, but into the broader philosophy of life, suggesting that every interaction, every challenge was an opportunity for growth. That evening marked the beginning of an unlikely mentorship, an improbable friendship forged in the crucible of conflict and transformed by mutual respect. Rex, once the beach's resident bully, became Li's most dedicated, if initially awkward, student. He began to shed the layers of aggression and insecurity that had defined him, replacing them with a newfound discipline and a genuine desire to learn. He started training with Li, not to prove his dominance, but to understand the intricate dance of mind, body, and spirit that Li embodied. The beach community, initially bewildered by this transformation, soon embraced it. Li's presence had been a catalyst, an unexpected force that had shattered the old hierarchy and replaced it with a quiet understanding of true power. His legend grew, not as a fearsome fighter, but as a wise mentor, a man who had shown them that strength was not about physical might, but about character, integrity, and the courage to be vulnerable. Years passed, and the sun continued to warm the sands of the beach. Li remained a quiet, unassuming figure, his daily routines a testament to his enduring discipline. But now, often by his side, was Rex, no longer the arrogant youth, but a man humbled and transformed. He still carried a certain intensity, but it was tempered by respect, his movements more fluid, his gaze more thoughtful. He had learned to listen, to observe, and most importantly to understand that true power resided not in the ability to inflict pain, but in the capacity for compassion and the relentless pursuit of self-mastery. The beach, once a stage for petty dramas, had become a crucible for quiet transformation, a testament to the enduring legacy of a man who had taught them all that the greatest battles are often fought and won within oneself.